"Pretend to accept my courtship until Twelfth Night," the Duke said, laying her storm-stained blanket across his desk. 12 hours earlier, Lavinia Catesby had held that same blanket toward a snow-covered stranger standing just inside her cottage door. Behind him, through the white fury of the open doorway, a broken carriage wheel leaned in the drift like a snapped bone. Now she knew why the name Geoffrey Fenwick had taken the warmth from the stranger's face, and why a duke was asking a nearly penniless cultivator to help him face the two people who had betrayed them both. By 8 o'clock, the blizzard had swallowed the lane and was throwing snow against Lavinia's shutters. She had barred the door, banked the fire, and counted her remaining logs twice. 6. Then timber cracked outside, followed by the scream of frightened horses. Lavinia seized the lantern and dragged open the door. The cold emptied her lungs. Beyond the threshold, a coachman fought the horses beside a dark carriage pitched into the drift. One wheel had split. No crest showed beneath the snow. A man reached her step and caught the doorpost. Even half buried in snow, his black greatcoat was cut from cloth too fine for any ordinary traveler. Yet beneath its costly collar, his lips had gone dangerously pale. Snow covered his dark hair, and his face held the fixed stillness of someone who had been cold too long. Inside, Lavinia ordered, "I must see to the horses. The coachman is seeing to them. You are about to fall on my floor, sir, and I would rather you did it before the wind removes my door." Something almost like laughter warmed his eyes. Then his knees weakened. Lavinia caught his arm and pulled him across the threshold, soaking her slippers and the front of her plain cream-wool gown. She kicked the door shut. For one suspended moment, they faced one another in the narrow cottage, she with both hands on the only warm blanket she possessed, he broad-shouldered and silent, snow melting down the fine black cloth of his coat. The hazel-brown blanket was rough-spun and darned at one corner with bright blue thread. Her mother had made it. Lavinia wrapped it around him before good sense could object. "You must sit. I shall ruin it. It has survived worse than snow." He lowered himself onto the wooden stool beside the hearth. Lavinia took off his wet gloves and set them near the grate. His fingers were stiff and reddened. She added 2 logs to the fire. 4 remained. Tomorrow's cold pressed against her mind. She smiled before the fear reached her face. "It is a fortunate thing," she said, stirring dried mint into a cup of hot water, "that my hearth draws well and my woodpile is absurdly generous." The stranger looked toward the basket beside the fire. It held 3 logs and a handful of chips. The 4th was hidden behind the copper warming pan. His gaze returned to her. He did not expose the lie. "I am in your debt," he said. His voice was low and steady, as though calm were something he could lend to a room. "I could not feel my hands when I reached the step. You may repay me by keeping them attached." This time he laughed. Warmth made his handsome face seem known. He touched the blue stitches at the blanket's corner. "You repaired this rather than replace it. A needle is cheaper than a weaver. And the blue thread. It was what I had. It is fine work." Lavinia turned toward the kettle. Geoffrey had called her mending an advertisement of poverty. This stranger studied the blue stitches as if they proved care rather than want. Outside, the coachman called that the horses were safe. Lavinia directed him to the abandoned byre, then barred the door again. "My coachman and groom will manage," the stranger said. "They have more sense than I displayed in attempting the North Road tonight." He gave his name as Nicholas Duncombe. He said it without a title. Perhaps he expected recognition. Lavinia had spent most of the past year on the northern edge of the estate, raising winter plants and avoiding county gatherings where Geoffrey's name might be spoken. Nicholas Duncombe meant nothing to her beyond the man under her blanket. She handed him the mint water. Lavinia Catesby. His expression altered at her surname, though only slightly. You cultivate plants here, where the rabbits permit it. Hellebores, snowdrops, rosemary, bay, and anything stubborn enough to survive my neglect. I doubt neglect has much to do with it. She smiled. Brightness was easier than gratitude. You have not met my rosemary. They spoke while the fire settled. Lavinia told him about forcing white hyacinths in the lean-to. Nicholas asked sensible questions and seemed oddly familiar with the estate roads. At last, Lavinia mentioned the half-frozen hound she had once carried home. Geoffrey Fenwick said it was a wretched habit, she added with a light laugh. Rescuing injured things. He believed it proved I had no sense of economy. Nicholas stopped with the cup halfway to his mouth. The open warmth left his face. Not coldness exactly, something more weary. The look of a man who had been struck in a place he had trained himself not to guard. How do you know Fenwick? He asked. The cheer in Lavinia's voice came automatically. Once rather well. He did not press. Exhaustion soon pulled at him. Lavinia gave him the settle and took the chair, overruling his protest. Long after he slept, she watched the fire sink around the log she had given him. She knew only that Geoffrey's name had wounded him, and that Nicholas Duncombe had noticed the blue thread no one else thought worth seeing. By dawn, the storm had broken. Snow lay over the fields in a blinding, unmarked sheet. The pounding on Lavinia's door came before she had pinned up her hair. Outside waited 6 mounted men in dark green livery, their horses steaming in the cold. At their head sat Roderick Montague, steward of Duncombe House. His stern face loosened with relief when Nicholas stepped from the cottage, wearing his damp greatcoat and Lavinia's blanket beneath it. Your Grace. Montague dismounted and bowed. We feared the axle had overturned the carriage. Lavinia's hand tightened around the door latch. Your Grace. The chipped cup, the wet gloves, the order to sit, every easy word returned, sharpened by rank. She had dragged the Duke of Duncombe through her door by the arm. Nicholas looked back at her. He did not seem ashamed of the cottage, the patched curtain, or the kettle blackened by years of use. Miss Catesby, he said loud enough for his men to hear, a wagon of seasoned wood will reach you before noon. It will replace what my lodging cost you. Nothing more. Her first instinct was refusal. Refusal let people admire her. There is no necessity, Your Grace. I am quite— She heard the brightness in her own voice, and stopped. His eyes softened, but he did not rescue her from the truth. What would you have charged any traveler who used half his host's winter stores? Any traveler. Any traveler. She considered. 4 logs, a cup of mint, and the trouble of drying the floor. Then I shall pay in wood and remain indebted for the floor. A groom hid a smile. Lavinia nearly joined him. Nicholas removed the blanket from his shoulders, then paused. The blue-darned corner rested in his gloved hand. May I borrow this until it is cleaned? You may. He folded it carefully and gave it to Montague before lowering his voice. How well did you know Geoffrey Fenwick? There was no kindness in pretending not to understand. Lavinia lifted her chin. We were engaged. My father died before the settlements were signed. When Geoffrey learned there would be no fortune, he discovered that affection had been a misunderstanding. The words came lightly. She had practiced them for a year. Nicholas did not smile with her. Isabella Carlyle was to marry me, he said. 1 week before the wedding, she left England with Fenwick. They married in Scotland and spent the year abroad. The white mourning seemed to tilt. Their humiliations had been joined and repeated at dinner tables across the county, while she hid among her frost frames. They returned today, Nicholas continued. Lord Carlyle has asked that I receive them at the customary 12th night gathering. If I refuse, I am bitter. If I welcome them alone, I am pitied. Fenwick will make certain you are discussed as well. He always preferred an audience. Nicholas's mouth tightened, but his voice remained warm. "Will you come to Duncombe House at noon? My widowed aunt is in residence. You will be received properly." He did not command, which made Lavinia wary. "To what purpose, Your Grace?" "I would rather explain it where your neighbors cannot watch. 6 men in my livery block the lane." She looked past him. 2 cottage windows farther down the road already showed pale faces behind curtains. "Very well." At noon, Lavinia entered the Duke's study. His widowed aunt, Lady Beatrice, had received her first satisfying propriety, and making Lavinia a guest rather than a secret. Montague left the study door ajar. Her cleaned blanket lay across the polished desk between 2 glasses of sherry. "Pretend to accept my courtship until 12th night," Nicholas said. Lavinia stared at him. In a dark blue coat and immaculate linen, he scarcely resembled the man on her stool. Yet the rough blanket disturbed the elegant room like an honest word. "A false courtship," she said. "A brief display of particular regard," he corrected. "Nothing that can be mistaken for an engagement. I shall assume every consequence when it ends." "And you believe standing beside a duke will protect me from Geoffrey's malice?" "No. I believe standing alone allows him to tell the county what your solitude means. If we stand together, he cannot decide the meaning for either of us." "You wish to use me as a shield." Nicholas met the accusation without retreating. "Yes." The answer surprised her. "Then why should I agree?" "Because I would also be yours." He rested one hand on the blanket. "Fenwick expects you to shrink. Isabella expects me to smile and make their comfort easy. I am tired of allowing cruel people to call their convenience forgiveness." Lavinia walked to the window. Duncombe House ran on certainties. Her life on candles, seed packets, and logs. "What do you require of me?" "Dinner in company, 2 walks through the public rooms, my escort at the 12th night feast. No declarations. No gifts." "Agreed." "No money attached to the pretense." "Agreed." "No liberty taken because the county expects a show. You may offer your arm. You will not take mine." A smile touched his eyes. "Agreed." "And when it ends, you will say publicly that the invention was yours." "I will." She turned from the window. "Then I have a condition of my own." Nicholas waited. "The south glass house has stood unused since the old gardener died. I asked Montague last autumn whether the estate would lease it. He refused to trouble you with so small a matter." Nicholas's brows rose. "I do not ask you to give it to me," she said. "I ask that my proposal be considered as any tenant's would be." "On its merits." "On its merits." He rang the bell. When Montague appeared, Nicholas asked for Lavinia's written proposal and the estate accounts for the glass house. The steward's surprise lasted less than a second. "Yes, Your Grace." Nicholas turned back to her. "No favor, no refusal without figures." For the first time since entering the study, Lavinia's smile was not a shield. "Then we understand one another." At Duncombe House, footmen opened doors before Lavinia reached them, and maids appeared before she asked. Lady Beatrice placed her in a guest chamber, facing the kitchen garden, and treated her bright answers with amused skepticism. The following afternoon, Lavinia entered the great hall beside Nicholas. Their difference in rank announced itself in every glance. Gentlemen bowed because the Duke was beside her. Ladies inspected her refashioned gown and wondered aloud when rustic simplicity became fashionable. Lavinia smiled. Cheerfulness made people believe they had not wounded you. It also made them careless. Nicholas moved through the house with effortless warmth. He greeted the housekeeper by name, remembered a stable boy's cough, and listened to a tenant's complaint about a flooded ditch as though nothing could be more important. He belonged to everyone. It made his warmth toward her less certain. Perhaps the blue thread meant nothing beyond his habit of making everyone feel seen. Near the staircase, Lady Hyam approached with 2 other women.
"How very fortunate the storm proved for you, Miss Catesby," she said. "One might almost envy such weather. A broken carriage can open remarkable doors."
Lavinia's fingers tightened in her skirt.
"The storm opened only my cottage door, Lady Hyam," she replied pleasantly. "His Grace opened the rest himself."
One of the women, Nicholas, had been speaking with Montague several paces away. He crossed to them without haste.
"Miss Catesby,"
he said, his tone warm enough to make rudeness look especially small.
"May I ask your advice in the conservatory? The frost has defeated our nurseryman's delivery, and I am told you possess stronger opinions than he does." "He is paid to agree with you, Your Grace."
"Then I am in desperate need of honest counsel." He offered his arm and waited. Lavinia placed her hand upon his sleeve. He did not close his hand over hers. Together they left Lady Hyam smiling at no one. The conservatory smelled of damp earth, old stone, and orange leaves. Several panes had cracked in the first storm. Trays of hyacinth bulbs stood too close to the cold glass, and the bay trees needed pruning. Nicholas watched Lavinia inspect the benches. The 12th night greenery was to come from London, he said. The roads have stopped the wagons. You have holly, ivy, laurel, yew, rosemary, and enough white hyacinths to perfume the entire county into submission. Can it be done? Not by your staff alone. They have been trained to preserve plants, not arrange a feast. What would you charge? She looked at him. He had remembered the cottage threshold. Any traveler, any cultivator, no charity. Lavinia named a sum large enough to pay 3 months' rent and small enough to be fair. Nicholas did not bargain her down. Montague will draw the agreement, he said. You may employ whom you need. The commission gave her work authority and a reason to remain after gossip exhausted itself. You planned that, she said. I hoped the plants would prove neglected. They are appallingly neglected. I have never been so relieved by failure. She laughed. The sound escaped before she could make it bright or useful. Nicholas looked at her as if he heard the difference. For the next 4 days, the conservatory became Lavinia's kingdom. Beyond the thin panes, wind hurled snow against the frames until the glass shuddered in its lead work. Inside, among the scent of rosemary and newly turned earth, the distance between Lavinia and Nicholas narrowed with every filled pot and every task completed side by side. She hired 2 gardeners' daughters, assigned footmen to cut greenery, and claimed every cracked cream bowl for forcing bulbs. She rose before breakfast and stayed until candlelight turned the glass black. Nicholas found reasons to appear. At first he came with questions from Montague. Soon he stopped pretending and simply rolled up his sleeves. You cannot carry that, Lavinia told him when he lifted a sack of potting earth. I carried it 3 steps before you objected. You carried it badly for 3 steps. Instruction, then. A duke asking instruction from a woman in an old apron should have felt absurd. Nicholas made it ordinary. He held the wooden frame while she tied the covering. He took correction without wounded pride. When he knocked a pot from the bench and sent earth over his polished boots, he laughed first and fetched the broom himself. The gardeners stared. Lavinia tried not to. He was kind without making kindness a performance of rank, Yet every interruption belonged to him: a footman's question, Lady Beatrice's guest list, a tenant's widow in the passage. He answered each with warmth, then returned, a little more tired. One bitter morning, Lavinia wired Rosemary with stiff fingers. Her good gloves were on Sally Turner, whose knuckles had split. Lavinia wore the ruined pair and smiled through the sting. Nicholas noticed. He said nothing. The next morning, a basket stood inside the conservatory door. It held 6 pairs of thick leather gloves, one for every person working there, including Nicholas. No private gift, no debt marked with her name. Lavinia found him trimming laurel. "The leather is excellent. Montague claims the estate can afford warm hands. Montague has never made so generous a claim." Then perhaps the figures persuaded him. She looked down at the gloves fitted to her hands. Geoffrey had given her a pearl comb, then reminded her of the debt. Nicholas gave 6 people what one woman needed, so she could accept it freely. He saw not only her need, he saw her fear of owing. The knowledge sat warmly and dangerously beneath her ribs. That afternoon they practiced their entrance. Nicholas offered his arm and waited. Lavinia set her fingers on his sleeve. Beneath the wool his forearm was solid and warm. They moved between rows of bay trees, matching their pace. When she looked up, his attention had narrowed. For once, he did not seem to belong to the estate, the tenants, the servants, or the entire county. He seemed present only with her. The intimacy frightened her more than contempt. Hope made her defenseless. She withdrew her hand and laughed too brightly. "We walk very well, Your Grace. No one will doubt us." Nicholas's smile remained, because his smiles always remained, but she saw the small pause before it formed. Perfection, he said, was the object. He stepped back at once. The room seemed colder for his obedience. 3 days before Twelfth Night, snow closed the roads again and trapped guests, petitioners, and half the neighboring county inside Duncombe House. Lavinia watched Nicholas spend himself upon them. He settled a quarrel, found a room for a clergyman's wife, and sent coal to a tenant whose roof had collapsed. When Lord Carlisle arrived, ashamed and angry, Nicholas poured him brandy and spoke of ordinary matters. No one saw Nicholas falter. By midnight, the passages were silent. Lavinia went to the conservatory to check the covered hyacinths. She found one lamp burning near the stone bench. Nicholas sat beneath it in his evening clothes, his cravat loosened. Across his shoulders lay her hazel-brown blanket, the blue-darned corner turned outward. For an instant, Lavinia saw the man from the storm. He noticed her and smiled, gentle, gracious, empty. She waited until it failed. His mouth lowered, his shoulders bent beneath the rough wool. The change was small, but it felt more intimate than a confession. Lavinia crossed the tiled floor and sat beside him. "You need not make this easy for me," she said. Nicholas stared at the dark panes. "I have made things easy for everyone for so long that I no longer know when I am doing it." The lack of self-pity made the words harder to hear. When Isabella left, he continued, "I stood in the assembly room and congratulated her father on surviving the scandal. I sent Fenwick and Isabella a wedding gift, because everyone was watching to see whether I would behave like a wounded man." "You were wounded?" "Yes." He gathered the blanket closer. "But a duke's anger frightens people. A duke's grief entertains them. Warmth was the only response that belonged to me before someone else named it." Lavinia understood too well the safety of a chosen expression. "I can endure having been left," he said. "I cannot endure being pitied for it." He looked at the blue stitches beneath his hand. "I kept this because you gave it to Nicholas. You did not know what house I owned, what favor I could grant, or whose opinion might change if I praised you. You saw a man who was cold." Lavinia's throat tightened. Everyone received something from Nicholas.
The blanket proved that for one night he had received without earning it through usefulness. She did not tell him he was good. Goodness was another duty people fastened to him. Instead, she shifted closer until their shoulders touched beneath the blanket. They sat listening to the faint ticking of cooling glass. At last, Lavinia said, "Forgiving them may be generous. Pretending they never hurt you is only another way of giving them what they want." Nicholas turned his head. "And what do you give people when you smile?" She went still. He did not withdraw the question. "That night," he said, "you had 6 logs." Lavinia looked down at her gloved hands. "You counted." "I saw the basket. I hid one behind the warming pan." "I saw that as well." A helpless laugh rose and broke before it became bright. "I gave you 4, she whispered. "I knew the road might remain closed for days. I knew I would be cold. But asking the estate for help would have meant being noticed as a difficulty." Nicholas said nothing. The silence forced her to continue without the shelter of his reassurance. "After my father died, Geoffrey told me he had mistaken gratitude for affection. He said a wife without fortune would always require too much. Since then, I have tried to require nothing." She pressed her palms together. "If I am useful, cheerful, and easily pleased, no one has reason to regret keeping me near." There was the rule by which she had lived. Nicholas covered her hands with his fierce feeling, roughening his voice. "You were frightened of the cold, and you gave me your fire. Not, you were foolish. Not, you should have asked." He named what she had done without making it noble enough to erase the fear. Lavinia turned her hands beneath his and held on. For once, neither tried to warm the world. The next morning, a letter arrived from the village inn. Isabella and Geoffrey had reached Warwickshire. They would present themselves at Duncombe House before noon and remain for the 12th night feast. Before they arrived, servants spoke more softly, and guests gathered early. Everyone wished to witness forgiveness, humiliation, or both. Isabella entered in blue silk and ermine. Geoffrey followed, polished by marriage and travel, but not improved. "Your Grace," Isabella said, holding out both hands, "I knew your heart was too large to deny us welcome." If Nicholas withdrew, he was bitter. If he embraced her, she received absolution before the room. Nicholas bowed over neither hand. "Duncombe House does not punish Lord Carlisle for his daughter's choices," he said. "You are received as his family." The warmth of the words could not conceal their limit. Isabella's smile tightened. Geoffrey found Lavinia beside the hearth. His gaze moved over her plain green gown, the small silver brooch at her shoulder, and the Duke standing across the room. "Lavinia," he said, "how industrious you remain. I had thought marriage might improve your conversation." His eyes sharpened. "Everyone knows about the carriage. Tell me, how long did you wait before sending for help? Long enough to secure gratitude? Long enough to make refusal ungentlemanly?" The old wound opened because others might believe him. Geoffrey turned slightly, allowing his next words to carry. A singular triumph of timing. A storm, an empty cottage, and the most eligible duke in the county at her door. Conversation died around them. Nicholas crossed the room. He did not look cold. He looked warm no longer. There was a difference. The generosity that usually opened his face had gathered into decision. "Mr. Fenwick," he said, "you will not accuse my guest through insinuation. Speak plainly or apologize plainly." Geoffrey glanced at the watching company. "Society has already spoken, Your Grace. They say Miss Catesby recognized your carriage and delayed assistance in order to create an obligation." "The carriage bore no crest," Nicholas said. "My servants will confirm it." He could have ended the matter with rank and witnesses. The room was ready to accept his word and forget hers. Nicholas turned to her instead. He gave her the space he could easily have occupied. Her first impulse was flight, to save him discomfort before anyone called her a burden. Then she saw the blanket near the fire, its blue stitches visible. Mended, not discarded. Lavinia unpinned the silver brooch Nicholas had lent her for the public pretense and placed it on the mantel. "I am leaving this room," she said. Geoffrey's smile returned. She let him enjoy it for one breath. "Because I have 36 hyacinths to arrange before supper, I am not leaving this house." The smile vanished. Lavinia faced the room. She did not brighten her voice for them. The carriage had no visible crest. His Grace was nearly senseless with cold. I opened my door because a human being required shelter. Mr. Fenwick believes kindness must conceal a bargain because he has never offered it without one. A murmur crossed the room. She looked directly at Geoffrey. "You did not ruin me when you left. You merely taught me the cost of building a life upon another person's approval. I do not regret the storm, and I will not apologize for surviving you." Then she turned to Nicholas. "Your Grace, the blue drawing room needs the bay branches moved before the candles are lit." His eyes warmed with something private and proud. "Then I shall not detain you." He stepped aside. Lavinia walked from the parlor under her own power, leaving Geoffrey in a silence he had earned. The 12th night feast filled the great hall with candlelight evergreen and forced hyacinths. Holly and laurel framed the musicians' gallery. White hellebores lined the tables, while blue ribbons tied rosemary at every place. The county admired the arrangements before remembering their maker. Lavinia stood beneath the south arch in her altered blue gown, answering 3 ladies who wished to order winter flowers. Across the hall, Geoffrey and Isabella gathered a smaller circle around themselves. Geoffrey raised his glass. "To unexpected romances," he called, "and to the cleverness required to secure them." A few answered. Nicholas rose from the head table. The hall quieted not because he demanded it, but because people had spent years learning to listen when he spoke. "There is no cleverness in this romance," he said. "There is, in fact, no courtship." Lavinia's breath stopped. Nicholas descended from the dais. He did not look toward Isabella. He came only as far as the open floor between himself and Lavinia, leaving enough distance that the choice of crossing it remained hers. "The appearance of courtship was my proposal," he continued. "Mine alone. I asked Miss Catesby to stand beside me, because I feared entering this house as a man the county pitied." A stir moved through the room. "I have spent a year behaving as though betrayal left no mark upon me. That was not dignity. It was fear dressed as grace. Miss Catesby owed me no protection, yet I borrowed her courage and permitted gossip to place the cost upon her." The people who had enjoyed his composure looked ashamed. "The flowers you admire tonight are hers," he said. "They were commissioned at her price and completed under her direction. Her glasshouse proposal is being judged upon its figures, not my favor." Montague, standing near the wall, inclined his head in public confirmation. Nicholas looked at Lavinia. "She did not know who I was when she opened her door. She gave me her fire, her blanket, and the only bed in her house. She asked for nothing. I will not reward that kindness by allowing any man to turn it into shame." Then he bowed deeply enough that everyone understood the respect was real. "The pretense is ended, Miss Catesby. You owe me nothing. Not gratitude, not silence, and not a future chosen for my convenience." The room waited. Nicholas said no more. Lavinia stepped onto the open floor. "The carriage bore no crest," she said. "The man at my door was freezing. I would have opened it for a laborer, a child, or Mr. Fenwick himself, though in the last case I might have counted my spoons afterward." Broke the tension. Geoffrey's face darkened. Lavinia did not smile to soften him. "I am a cultivator. I mend what can be mended. I protect what can survive the frost. But I no longer mistake endurance for obligation. She looked toward the flowers and blue ribbons, the work she had claimed. I intend to lease the south glasshouse. I intend to fill it with winter bloom. Any person who wishes to question my skill may do so, after paying for the privilege of seeing tonight's arrangements. Lady Hyam was the first to. Then she crossed the floor and asked whether Lavinia could supply white hyacinths for a February dinner. A dowager who had ignored Lavinia all week turned her back upon Geoffrey and joined Lady Hyam. Two gentlemen left his circle. Lord Carlisle closed his eyes. A small sounded through the sudden quiet as one of the sticks of Isabella's fan snapped beneath her fingers. No guard removed Geoffrey. No command silenced him. The county simply ceased to admire him. Nicholas remained where he was. He did not claim Lavinia's victory. She crossed the remaining distance of her own accord. "Your Grace," she said. His expression held the question he would not ask before witnesses. Lavinia offered her hand, not because the pretense required it. The pretense was over. Nicholas took it. Began near the servants' door, where Sally Turner stood with rosemary on her apron, and spread through the hall like warmth. 3 days later, Lavinia signed the lease for the South Glasshouse. Montague challenged her figures, corrected one, and admitted that her projected income exceeded the glasshouse's cost to the estate. Nicholas did not attend. His absence proved the lease belonged to her. Deposits from 11 commissions paid the first quarter's rent, 2 wages, and 4 new panes. Lavinia spent a morning imagining rows of hellebores, narcissus, rosemary, and bay. At dusk she returned to her cottage. Snow slid from the thatch. Inside, a modest fire burned from wood she had bought with her first commission. She set the lease beside the kettle and did not smile at the empty room. She did not need to persuade it. A shadow crossed the window. When Lavinia opened the door, Nicholas stood on the step. No carriage or servants waited behind him. He wore a plain dark coat and carried the cleaned blanket, its blue darned corner visible. "The Duke of Duncombe has an estate to manage," he said. His breath clouded in the cold. "Nicholas, however, has come to return borrowed property." Lavinia took the blanket, but did not move aside. "You have carried it here in weather that threatens another storm. That is poor management." "I hoped for expert correction. You receive it freely." His smile came warm and unguarded. Then it faded, not into emptiness, but into seriousness. "I also came to ask whether I may court you. In truth," he said, "without a deadline, without an audience, without any promise from you beyond permission to try." The old fear stirred. A duke's future could swallow a woman's work and name. Nicholas did not mistake her silence for rejection. He waited outside her door. "My glasshouse comes first," she said. "It should. I will not abandon my work to become an ornament at Duncombe House." "I should be disappointed if you did." "And when I say I am quite well, you may sometimes be required to ask again." A soft laugh escaped him. "That condition may prove the most demanding." Lavinia's hand tightened around the edge of the door. She had only just secured a lease wages for 2 women, and work that belonged beneath her own name. If she closed the door now, no man could disturb the safety she had built. She could remain useful solvent and beyond the reach of anyone capable of leaving her. The old bright smile rose by instinct, ready to make the refusal painless for him. She let it fall. Nicholas did not lean across the threshold. He did not promise to protect her from the life she had created or offer to make it easier beneath his authority. He merely stood in the snow and waited to be invited into it. Lavinia looked at the man who had stepped forward when power was needed and back when the choice belonged to her. Safety had once meant requiring nothing and keeping every door closed. She could preserve that safety now. She would also preserve the loneliness. "Yes, Nicholas," she said, "you may court me." Relief warmed his whole face. He still did not cross the threshold. Lavinia opened the door wider. "Come in, before I am obliged to rescue you twice." He entered, carrying snow and cold with him. She closed the door, took one edge of the blanket, and drew it around both their shoulders beside the fire. The blue stitches rested between their joined hands. Once, the blanket had meant surviving by giving away the little warmth she possessed. Now it meant warmth without debt, need without shame, and a door opened by choice.